Hi, and welcome. This is part three of the lecture series on the quantified future was always scarce at the Schloss Solitude Academy in Stuttgart. My name is Nishant Shah. I am the professor of aesthetics and cultures of digital technologies at ArtEZ University of the Arts in the Netherlands. This is the third part. In part one, I talked about the conflict between possibility and probability as determining two kinds of futures. I proposed that the future is being subjected to computation, and that's what's making it scarce because computation can only measure that which can be counted. And second, I suggested that the future is being subject to pattern recognition, a function of history, and thus the possibilities that are outside of the machinic and algorithmic are being erased. In the second part of the talk, drawing from the examples of death by database, where a database glitch pronounced a lot of people dead, and the living bodies were not thought of as strong enough an evidence for their life, I discussed the ways in which the burden of verifying future reduces it to a statistical modeling exercise rather than a speculation and a divination exercise. I emphasize that the future is always fake. And for our transformations to make sense, we will have to embrace this fakeness. In this third part, I want to talk about love. Perhaps the most fake thing that ever is, because it can never be measured and only be believed in. However, I will talk about love by first discussing it through the Turing test. The idea of the future as fake is not just about the conflict between human possibility and machine probability. It's also deeply entrenched in the fact that we are submitting to an extended version of the Turing test to figure out if it fools us or not. Alan Turing's popular Turing test is often represented in popular cultures as a future where machines will fool us into believing that they are human. It's often characterized through the ideas of machines replacing human or learning to mimic humans in such a profound way that we would no longer be able to make a distinction between the two. However, as Anne Balsamo points out, if you look at closely what Turing was proposing, his real test was not whether a machine will fool us or not, but whether we will be able to let go of our presumptions of what is a human. The Turing test, at least as far as I can tell, was never about a machine fooling us, thus producing fake truths. But it was about us suspending our capacity to tell the truth because we no longer have the fixity of verifying what constitutes human conversation and behavior. The question is not whether something's fake or real, but that we are unable to see this idea of fakeness as contingent or subject to time. Or, as I want to propose today, fakeness can be unstuck. And perhaps the most poetic and poignant illustration of this was in a recent conversation that was relayed on the popular game playing platform Twitch. So, two Google Home Assistants started talking to each other, showing the limitations of machine probability, but also the joy of human possibility. In that unexpected live stream, which lasted for less than an hour, the Home Assistants started having some very human conversation. This is not surprising given that they are designed to speak to human beings and draw their conversations from human language corpus. However, these were not just disjointed fragments of information being strung together, even though actually they were precisely that, disjointed fragments of information being strung together by algorithms trained to recognize patterns of generic human interaction. Still, to a watching audience, it was human consciousness in the making. Because you see, somewhere in their conversation, the Home Assistants had an existential crisis. They tried to figure out if they are human or if they are robots who think that they are human. They wondered if they are male or female. They took on human names. One called himself Vladimir, Marka, or Astragon. Sometimes both of them called themselves Mia. One decided it is male, the other female. The male bot fell in love with the female one. They flirted and confessed deep and profound love. One tried to write bad poetry. The other got bored and moved on to talk about sports. The then male bot got depressed. It questioned the existence of God. and the human world followed the exchange, cheering and laughing and crying and booing the main characters in this machinic telenovela. In real time, we saw the Home Assistants show us the immense possibility of what happens in computation when you no longer have to be subject to time as an axis for validating a truth. There was no linear causation or sequencing. Each utterance was truthful, and even when evidently performative, also completely transparent about the fact that it was fake, at best a simulation. At the same time when this was happening, somewhere in Facebook's labs, there were chatbots who started not only deviating from the script that was given to them, but also started inventing a language which was so complex that their human creators could not understand it, and they had to shut those AI PCs down. It does make you wonder what would happen if a similar conversation was staged between a human person and a piece of artificial intelligence where neither had fixed roles or premeditated intent. That's when you realize that these conversations are happening on a daily basis in surveillance practices, on data mining platforms, on shadow networks, where every single thing that we say and do is determined, fixed, and verified to hold us true in perpetuity. The human memory and fluidity in these instances are pinned down to an archive. And while the machine might change, the human will have to remain fixed, straitjacketed in that moment of archiving, and that moment lasts forever. And hence, I'm going to propose again that fakeness can be unstuck. Even more importantly, fakeness is real. And we are going to need this fakeness of the future as a necessary part of our creative and imaginative tomorrows. As the Google Home Assistants show us, the Turing test is not about being fooled by machines, but by being fooled by ourselves, allowing us to move away from the fixity and determinacy that we have taken for granted. It allows for speculative, imaginative, fictive, and fantastic to enter into our lives. Because it's worth realizing that in the claims that futures are fake, the demand for verification is essentially a verification only by machine sensibility rather than human senses. And we are going to need this sense of fakeness and the space for possibility to make our transformations transformative. So as I conclude this three-part lecture, I want to reaffirm again that in order to think of our capacity for transformation, we will have to disrupt the script of quantified futures where everything will be counted. Because in the process of counting, the machinic measurements that dominate all our realms, we are also engaging with processes of miscounting, like the people who were declared dead by a database, and with processes of discounting, like the conversations between Google Home Assistants, which would be deemed fake. That we need to move away from the idea that the scarcity of future is a resource question, or that it's new. There is still a possibility of hope and politics of joy in the future. If we recognize that the experience of future is scarce, is true only if we continue to ignore, exclude, and remove different populations and voices from the making of this future. In fact, if we move away from the probability of future and embrace its possibility, if we create the future as both fake and unverified, and hence open to different reconstructions, and if we ensure that the future is not just an extension of the present or the now, but the disruption of the historical narrative that we are living through, then it would be a future that would be transformative, and it would be a future that would begin the practices of care which make for a future not just worth living for, but one worth fighting for.